So welcome to Resync, Nivi. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So our show is about exploring the connection between personal transformation and systemic change, which I think you're very well on your way to doing.
A little bit.
A little bit. And today, Nivi is with us. She is the director and host of the Get Schooled podcast and a consulting analyst at Accenture. She's also an awardee for the Net Impact 25 Under 25. How's it feel to be an awardee?
Oh, very glamorous. Red carpet treatment all the time.
Is that right?
No, not really. It was just a fun thing to do, though.
That's awesome. Well, I wanted to talk about some serious stuff later, but I wanted to start with something a bit more lighthearted, which is I was looking you up and stalking you as we do in this day and
As
age.
you do.
And I found your couch surfing profile.
Oh, yeah.
And on your couch surfing profile, you said there were two amazing things you've done, and they did not seem to be on the same caliber. So I'm very curious to hear a little bit about them. One was peeing in the Mediterranean Sea, and the other was surviving a bomb attack. Could you tell me a little bit about some of those?
Those were very different things. The first one, it was just your typical. I made the couch surfing profile when I was studying abroad in 2015.
Yeah.
And so when we went to Spain, that was just near the Mediterranean Sea. There wasn't a very interesting story behind it, but I had to think of something to put on the couch surfing profile. So that was the one.
That's kind of a bold thing. You're like inviting people to your house and you're like, and I peed in a sea.
It's worked out so far. So
yeah,
I think it's been working. No one's called me out on it yet, but maybe no one's read it either. So
it hasn't been a conversation topic with your...
It actually has never until now been a conversation topic. But now I've peed in the Mediterranean Sea.
That's great. I've peed in some seas as well.
Yeah. It's a thing to do, right? Like when you go travel the world.
Absolutely.
Mark your territory.
And the bomb attack, that was pretty different.
Yeah. So I lived in India for 2 years in 2006, 2007, part of 2008. And I lived in a city in South India called Hyderabad. And one time my family and I were out at the movie theaters. And we were driving home. And when we got home, we had like 30 calls in our voicemail, and we found out that the park right next to the movie theater, like 15 minutes, like probably close to when we were driving by, blew up. It was really tragic. A lot of people were injured and even killed. And we were reading the news next morning, and they found like 12 or 14, I don't remember the exact number, of bombs across the city. Only 2 of them went off. Well, that's a lot, but 2 of them went off, and the other ones didn't, and one of them was in the movie theater. So
that's pretty scary.
Yeah, it was a close call for sure.
What was the impact that had on you, if anything?
Well, it was 2 things. The first thing was it made like Hyderabad and India news, but I don't think it was like a global thing. And so more than really just personally, that was my first time realizing like this is such a serious, tragic event. And a lot of my friends' families were affected, but I don't exactly remember the amount of casualties in the attack, but it was significant, and it wasn't being reported on anywhere else. But yeah, secondly, it was probably the first time that I personally had experienced like, oh, you could die at any second now. I was like maybe 11 at the time, so a little too young to have an existential crisis. But I think if that happened now, I would just reevaluate a lot of things.
Sometimes it's good to be 11.
Oh, yeah.
Most times not, but
no, it's not that much of a fun age.
Very great. Well, thanks for sharing a bit about that. That just caught my interest when I was stalking, quote unquote. So I wanted you to tell a little bit about your life and a little bit about how you've ended up with what you're doing and your interest in your career. So I'm just curious, did you have a moment or a time when you first got a sense of what you thought maybe your career or your work would be about, what you wanted it to be about?
I think ever since I was growing up, you ask like little kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always used to say I wanted to be a teacher. And then as I grew up and learned stuff about the world and learned like you don't make that much money, that kind of changed. But I've always been interested in doing stuff like right now I'm a consultant. I wouldn't call that my passion, but it pays the bills. But throughout, my mom was a teacher. I just grew up like hearing stories from schools, and I used to volunteer sometimes on weekends, and I taught at a summer camp for 5 years. And so just throughout my life, I've always been interested in like child development and education. And until very recently, haven't done anything about it on a larger scale. But a lot of factors after I started working and things like that just made me think I needed to, actually do something more and follow up on the passion that I have.
Where did it come from? Where did that kind of interest start as a kid?
Yeah, so beyond just being generally interested in working with kids, I think they're a lot of fun. You learn a lot of things. They're all really crazy. And working in summer camp, it wasn't until college that I truly realized that my education was really different from other people's. I kind of had a sense the whole time, right? So I was raised in the Silicon Valley. I went to Lynbrook High School, which is consistently like California's best, if not the nation's best public schools. But all of the time, like through high school, it was just reading that off a list. So I was like, okay, we might be top, whatever, 50, 100, but it can't be that far off from everyone else. Got to college, and that's when I realized I was dead wrong.
So what happened in college?
I lived with a lot of people freshman year that I had a lot of interesting conversations with. They never struck me as less than intelligent or, I never thought they were dumb. But the courses that we were in together, we got really, really, really different grades. And so that's like when I was realizing that it's not like there's something wrong with the person, but we've just been brought up and educated very differently. And I think with a lot of people I met, there was just no sense of importance for like school.
Can you give me an example where like that realization really hit in for you, where you saw the grades, or you talked about grades or the courses, you just felt a big difference?
Yeah. So my freshman year roommate and I were very close. We would always hang out together. She was great, fun time. We would talk about a lot of interesting things. But she would often ask me to like review her papers for English class and other courses, but mostly English. And when she would talk, you would never think that she was like bad at English or not a native speaker or anything like that. But her writing level was about the same, if not less, than my little brother's, and he's like 4 years younger than me.
How'd you see that? Like, how'd you notice that her writing level is so different?
It was very obvious. So when she was like letting me grade her papers, you'd have sentences that just honestly didn't even make sense. Like you would be reading it and you'd be like, I don't understand what you're trying to say with this. And then when I would ask her, hey, what are you trying to say in this paper? She would explain it to me really clearly, and there would be like no problems. And so I don't know, it must have been somewhere along the lines of like writing class in elementary, middle, high school where that gap just somehow arose, or like maybe she just never took a good writing class. But I can't think of any other reason why like the way she thinks is coherent, but the way it translates to paper was just like sentences would start with but and not have like some sentences would like not even have like subject verb agreement, or like I don't know. It was not a fun time.
Gotcha. And so what did you make of this? You said this had a profound impact on you. What was your kind of reflection from seeing sentences that were like, wow, I learned how to do this in fourth grade or whatever?
Yeah. That made me realize, like, not just because of the sentences and stuff like that, but just her quality of work, and then like the quality of the person that she was in conversation. I think that gap really made me feel like, oh, I have such an advantage, not because of the person I am, but because of how I've been educated. And it's really not fair that this isn't the same level of quality for everyone, because I think that's something, I think like looking back, if I were in her place, I would feel deprived. I would be like, I am this capable person, but I haven't been given the resources at an early age to succeed. So I think that just made me feel like, okay, why doesn't everyone have like a similar level of education to what I have? How can I help provide that for people? And also, it's nice to hang out with people who are like academically ahead and just like capable in terms of school, in terms of work, in terms of what they're passionate about. And like where she is now is just like very different from where I am. I'm really not sure what she's doing or if she's employed, and I don't know if she sees that as a bad thing, but I think like that lack of that gap will really affect her for the rest of her life.
So you're sort of noticing a difference in not intelligence or character, but just training. You're talking about you got some training she didn't get, and you're seeing a gap in career outcomes in your mind.
I definitely think so. And I think, everyone's different. Everyone has different levels of whether or not they're good at school. And I don't think that has to be a reflection. I don't think you have to get good grades or, good SAT score to be a smart person. But I think you should have the same opportunity to be like trained a similar way. So yeah, I would say that most of it boils down to just training.
And so then you saw this and now you're working in education, but I think there was a gap between those two, right? It wasn't like I remember seeing you or hearing you say somewhere you actually were interested in going to the corporate world at some point.
Yeah.
So where did that kind of corporate influence come in? Was that before or after that incident you mentioned?
That was like during and through most of college. And that's where I am now, so I can't say I've completely made the change. And most of it was because that was just, that was the path, right? Like I was educated. I had this incredible education, but that education was mostly like, okay, now you can go make money. And so I was like, great, I want to go into consulting. I want to work long hours. I want to bring home the big bucks. But
why those things? Was there like an example or something in college that made it seem like that was the path to you?
I think it was just the people that I hung out with. They were all very, I tried to hang out with, as I said, like people that were performing better academically. And a lot of those people had like similar interests of like going into the business world and making money. And maybe someday after you make all that money, you can, do something good for the world. But it was just a combination of the people I hung out with and the clubs I joined. And I don't think there's anything bad about the corporate world, but I think it was like, oh, follow your passion. But I don't know if I really knew that I had one until towards the end of college.
Interesting. So that freshman story took a little while to percolate up into something more tangible and serious.
Yeah, it was, I think for a long time, even though it affected me a lot, it was kind of a back of mind, like conscience nagging on you kind of thing, where it was like, I know I should do something about this and I want to do something about this, but A, I'm probably going to go into the corporate world, and also B, I don't know. I feel bad about this problem, but I don't know what to do.
So you say probably go into the corporate world. I remember I was a bit of an activist when I was in college. My first job was a anti-war community organizer. I took a gap year between high school and college. And I remember senior year, all these recruiting firms coming in and doing those recruiting things they do. And I was like, I will not touch that with a stick.
Yeah.
So I don't think corporate interests are inherent. I mean, I did end up working in corporations later, so my opinions have changed. But I'm just curious, what made you feel like this corporate interest was the thing you wanted to kind of pursue? You said friends, and I'm just curious if there's anything else that's
friends and like, I think teaching and nonprofit work and activism and social impact stuff is not usually portrayed as highly impactful or glamorous. And I think that's starting to change. And I think that's really important, because a lot of how I was brought up was about prestige, was about, oh, your family needs to be proud of what you've done. And, consulting at Accenture was a good way to achieve that goal. And, people aren't too mad about their kid being a consultant at Accenture. And so I think that's why I went after consulting. It was, a lot of it was for superficial reasons. And I again, don't think that's a bad thing. Like, you can go after stuff for reasons that you want to. But it wasn't so much that I thought I would be fulfilled, or I knew I would be fulfilled. I was like, I want to work in cool tech companies and do cool projects. And I've done those things, and it's awesome. But I'm definitely glad there's more of a push nowadays towards millennials and young people getting involved and actually finding fulfilling work, because that did impact one of my reasons to take this education project more seriously, because I was like, it's something that I want to do, and also it's something that people think it's cool that I'm doing. And I know that sounds maybe a little like dumb or like trying to please other people, but I think social influence is a huge part of how people operate.
It is. It totally is. There's tons of research that shows you are kind of the summation of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and you're healthier if you have 3 close friends and all of that. So it's really important. But I do want to dive into that a little bit, actually. I think the kind of influence your parents have on you is always really interesting. The influence society has on you, to your point about, well, if society thinks it's cool if I do this, then I want to do it. I guess what I'm curious about is some parents are kind of can be put a lot of pressure on you, right? To be frank.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if your desire to please, if you can say anything kind of personal about the emotions behind your desire to please parents or please society, and where that comes from for you.
Yeah. So growing up in an Indian family and being in the Silicon Valley, that was definitely a lot. My dad, from a very, very young age, has always put a lot of pressure on me. Sometimes it's been good, sometimes it's had unfavorable outcomes. But when I was like 8 or 9 or whatever, he made me memorize like all of the multiplication tables, like up till 20 times 20, and would like quiz me daily and would give me a bunch of like math problems to do every day. And if I didn't finish them, I had to do it the next day in addition to the following day's math problems. And so I think it's like that is kind of built in, like the pressure for my parents and trying to please them has always kind of been built into me. But I think more so in high school, going to Lynbrook, it was definitely peer pressure. And what I was just talking about, I'm greatly influenced by, how my friends are doing, what they're thinking of me, like stuff like that.
Can you say why?
I honestly just think it's the type of person that I am. I think my reflection, like the type of personality I'm portraying and like the grades I'm getting at that point in time, that was really important to me, because in my high school, it was not about like how cool you were, or like how cool you were was measured by how many academic achievements you had and how many involvements you had in the extracurricular activities you did. And I don't know exactly why or how to explain it, but that was like the biggest factor of like why I was like felt so much pressure to perform and do well. And I think that specific environment was very toxic. I think there's ways that you can have, like, it's positive to some extent, because you're working hard and things like that, but it was a lot. It was like a pressure cooker.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it sounds like, and I can empathize with you. My dad, not Asian, but from a Jewish family, had some trauma in the past, and so very much wanted security and safety, and so pressured me a lot, and that was hard for me. I had to eventually like intentionally fail a class in high school to get him off my back, and still that showed up in other ways. Yeah, but I think there's something interesting about how you derive kind of who you are, like you said. And I'm just curious if you can say how that journey's been for you. Is it something where you, you still, or how do you define success for yourself today? Is it the same as back then or not?
It's definitely changed a lot. In high school, I don't think I would ever have described myself as a balanced person, which, it's kind of bad to say. But yeah, I always felt overworked, and there were very few times that I think I was really happy. And those were when I got to spend time with my friends, when I got to hang out with my speech and debate team, or like do the things that I had chosen for myself. And so thankfully I went to UC Davis, which I wasn't too thrilled about from the beginning. And honestly, it was just because I thought it was my best option. But almost like the first week I got there, it was like a huge change in environment. It was clear that, academics weren't the number one thing on everyone's mind. And college is just, people care a lot more about their social life and their personal well-being. And that balanced me out greatly. And so my friends that I made at Davis, one of my best friends, Lana, that's doing the podcast with me. She started out similarly where she entered college with a biology major, and she was like, I don't know, I don't want to go to med school. I don't want to do with this. And so we had lots of conversations the entire freshman year. We were like, okay, Lana, like you need to change your major. And so the following year she changed it to environmental science because she's been passionate about sustainability. You know, we're both kind of like the world saving but don't know how to save the world types.
Me too.
Yeah, I think that's common. I think that's a good thing because I think we're all trying. But she's been a huge part of it, and I think she's just like a far more balanced person than I am. And so the friends that I've made in high school, in college, and the decisions they've made and like the change that I've seen in their not only personal happiness but success. Like with Lana, for example, she was just doing a lot better in her classes. She would actually talk about what she was learning a lot. And so that really started inspiring me to figure out what I wanted to do with my life a lot more seriously than just the high school, like, oh, let's just make everyone happy kind of thing.
So if you had like a younger sister who is in high school right now, what would you tell her?
So I do have a younger brother who's in his second year of college. And I've been talking about this a lot. I think he feels, you know, a similar, we've raised in the same place. And I've told him, like, honestly, at the end of the day, what matters is your health and your well-being. And I don't think that's something that kids from my background get to hear a lot. And hopefully that's changing. But we've been having a lot more conversations where it's like, dude, take care of yourself first. Like, you can do school and you should do well in school. But if you need to take a break, that's not a bad thing. People aren't going to think you're dumb. You need to do what's good for yourself.
What does it feel like to share that with your brother?
Honestly, it's been hard because I think if I were that age, I wouldn't have listened, and I don't think that he's taken it to heart. I'm hoping he's starting to because I've been bugging him about this a lot. But I think it's hard because for a lot of these values and growth experiences are so ingrained in you that, you know, if your older sister is like, hey, have some fun once in a while, you're not always going to be like, oh, okay, my whole outlook on life has changed. So I think it's something that has to be ingrained from a younger age, but also honestly needs to be realized for yourself.
Yeah, sometimes you can only learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I want to move on and talk about your senior year of college and a little bit before that. We talked a little bit about how you got interested in the corporate world and a little bit of the budding interests of yours in nonprofit and education. But I know being a net impact was a significant part of that, part of your journey and your life. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit how you found out about it and how you decided to start a chapter at UC Davis.
Yeah, totally. So I knew about net impact almost all throughout college just because Berkeley has a huge presence. But I was never interested in it because for their campus, I had only known of it as a consulting organization because that's what they do. But senior year of college, I was researching, or before senior year of college, I was researching it a bit more because I had wanted to start a campus organization because, again, I was like, I need to follow my passions and I don't know what they are. So the same conflict arose when I wanted to start a club. I was like, I don't know what I want to do. But I looked into the Net Impact, like national, international organization, and basically what it looked like is, hey, we care about social and environmental sustainability, and if you care about it too, you can tackle it any way you want. And I was like, that's cool.
Why was that appealing to you?
It was because I still was at the point where I was like, want to start a club, don't know exactly where to go, but I did know that I knew enough smart people and driven people to where if I got them together and if I just took this idea and did something with it, it would spread and people would come back to me. And honestly, I was like, the people around me are going to help shape this vision so I don't have to. And so my directed laziness, if you will, helped me discover that I actually was passionate about this kind of layout.
To me, it actually sounds like a self-awareness. You knew you didn't know something, but you knew you knew people who did. And so this is an organization where you could channel your not knowing and the people part into something more.
Yeah, definitely. I would consider myself a very self-aware person, which is a good thing because I have a lot of these moments where I'm like, a lot of people are better at me at what they do and they know what they want to do. So I'm gonna just let them drive it.
That's awesome. I think that's an important part of leadership. So tell me what happened. So you decided you didn't know you wanted to help, you didn't know how, but you knew people, and Net Impact could help channel that. What happened next?
So back to Lana, whom I was talking about, she actually helped me found that. I went over to her house one day, I think towards the end of junior year. I was like, Lana, I want to start a club. And she was like, great, can I start it with you? And I was a little wary of that, honestly, because working with friends is always tough because those boundaries are kind of smudged and you never know. But she's like, dude, come on, like, I'm smart, we can do this. And I was like, you're right. And so we started putting the word out there. We got in contact with a few professors and we were like, we want to start this organization. It's about social environmental sustainability. And then one day we got an email from another person who was also trying to start Net Impact at Davis. And thankfully we were both open to like merging, and they actually had like a proposal and a plan and stuff like that. So we got in contact with them, and turns out that they're being sponsored by like the Innovation Institute of Food and Health at Davis. So it was just this mix between proactivity and serendipity, where by reaching out and by putting like the word out there, we just heard back from these people who had all their stuff together and were sponsored. And so that's just where it started blossoming.
So in our podcast here, we like to hear a bit about how something internal changes your approach to life. And I know when we chatted a little bit before, you were telling me this was kind of that example. So what about this experience really had a deep internal impact on you that's really shaped who you are now?
Yeah, so honestly, Net Impact was one of the most, if not the most, transformative experiences ever. And the reason I say that is because that was the first time when I was like, I know I'm feeling fulfilled and I know this or something like this is what I want to do. And it wasn't so much exactly the organization. It was just the feeling of being able to empower people on my team. We had 3 like sub teams, and my leadership team and we provided all the resources, we provided all the help, we had weekly training sessions, and we got people networked. But beyond that, I kind of sat back and was like, you have these ideas and I'm going to help you be successful, but you need to tell me what you need. And so like giving people the resources to succeed and empowering the members of my team showed incredible results. And also I just left every meeting and every Net Impact related event feeling better than I had felt before entering that event. And so I was like, I've never had another time in my life when I've like felt the same feeling of personal fulfillment. And so that was the first time I was like, okay, I always knew there might have been something beyond just like corporate goals and stuff like that, but I never knew what it was. And although I'm still not completely solidified on it, that was like a great direction and a great confirmation of, okay, you can actually be fulfilled in something.
So you describe it as, helping support people is what I'm hearing you say. Was there a specific moment or was there something else? I'd love to hear a story or an example of that moment.
Yeah. So
period.
A lot of people that joined Net Impact, it was not, we weren't targeting people of like a specific background or a specific level of experience. We were just like, you want to change the world? Come join us and we'll see what we can do. And it was really the transformation over that year when I had founded it and like being able to see all of the results and all of like the people in my club change.
Can you be specific? Like, could you give me this result, this person or yourself or something like that?
Yeah. So one of the teams that we had in Net Impact was the education management team. And this was the first quarter out of the 3 that we were running. They had no idea what they wanted to do. And they were like throwing a lot of ideas around. And their leader, Maria, who is now one of my really close friends, she came in I think she might have been like a junior or something. She just came in like at a similar place where I was, where she was like, I don't know what I want to do, and I wish I'd found something like this earlier. But sitting down with her and hearing her ideas and helping her team just like rise out of their confusion.
What were they confused about?
They were just confused about what to do, which is a really common struggle. And so they were like, we're the education team, and education's huge. And I was like, dude, I feel you. I'm on the same level as you. But by the end of this, we had a showcase run by our sponsors and a few like members of the Davis community, professors and stuff. They ended up winning, I don't remember, I think it was $1,500 to get their project off the ground. And so what they did was they developed this seminar about cultural competence, and they piloted it at UC Davis, and it's still running to this day. So just seeing them, like, by giving these people the resources and some little bit of direction and encouraging them and showing them that, they could do something. Like, not only did they find an idea and did they find clarity, but they've created this project that's still running today, and that might even be expanded to other schools.
So cultural, tell me more about what the project's doing. It sounds really cool.
It is really cool. So it's called Project Link, and basically the premise is that a lot of schools and a lot of students in the United States lack cultural competence. They've not often been exposed to other cultures. They, don't have the same level of cultural sensitivity, and that's an increasingly important skill in a globalizing world. And so they took that data and they took here's the big problem that we're encountering, and they've made a seminar that basically connects you with I forgot what they ended up doing, either with other students in the Davis community that are international students or students from a school abroad, but they have these weekly video conferencing meetings, and they developed like a 10-week lesson plan with what they'll learn every week and what kind of themes they'll talk about every week. And so one of them was like, is recycling a thing in your country? So it's not just about like learning about your culture overall. It's about these political things, these social things that you might not even consider.
So what was meaningful for you about that, being part of helping make that happen? It sounds like important work, but I'm curious what the part that you really connected to was.
Yeah, the part I really connected to was the fact that we were all college students with, we were doing this all on our free time. And a lot of the people in the team were people who had never had any exposure to something like this before, but were interested. And so what really impacted me was knowing that you can harness people's interests, and by giving them resources, by giving them training and workshops and stuff, you can have them succeed. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy special. It doesn't have to be like, they have to be funded through Y Combinator, but just by developing and nurturing people at any age, helping them succeed. And I think that just kind of made me realize and made me wish, like, if I could see this happening at an earlier age, if students that were younger, because Maria, the leader of Project Link, she was like, Nivi, net impact has like changed how I interact with people. I'm a lot more professional. I know how to carry myself in conversations. I know what to ask for, and I never knew any of that stuff before, and it's because of this organization. And she was like, I wish I knew about it earlier, and I wish we'd done something like this earlier. So
do you feel the same way?
Oh, certainly I do.
Can you give me an example?
An example of what?
An example of how net impact helped you feel more professional and more able to present yourself better and really changed your I mean, you gave me an example of how it changed your life, but the professional part.
Yeah. Actually, for me, it wasn't so much the professional part, because I'd been involved in a lot of other professional groups. But the thing for me was like the last piece that I said about asking exactly what you want. And I realized that people are willing to pitch in and they're willing to help as long as you can tell them why. And this was the first like entrepreneurial type organization that I'd been part of. As I mentioned, we didn't have any kind of structure when we first started. We didn't even really know what our goals were going to be. But through learning how to ask the right questions, through learning how to actively contact stakeholders and people that are a lot smarter than you and a lot more well-connected than you, it's not hard to reach out, but I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And that's something that I don't know if I struggled with, but I didn't really understand how impactful it could be to reach out to someone in your network and just tell them, hey, this is something really cool that we're doing, and I want your thoughts on it, and I want to know if you'd be interested in helping out.
What does it feel like when they say yes, when you kind of put yourself out there and they say, yes, I'll give you my time?
It is awesome because we not only were able to have people's time, we were able to just shape a lot of like our projects and our structure. And also, we were able to get sponsors. And as I mentioned to you, like we got Maria's team to win like 1,500. And I think we had in our showcase like a total of 2,000 of funding. And so being able to see that not only do people just care enough to be like, oh yeah, that's cool, here's a suggestion. A lot of the people we talked to were like, I'd be so happy to be a guest speaker at your event, or help sponsor your event. And that's just something I really didn't know, that people out of the goodness of their heart would just be like, yeah, what you're doing is awesome and I want to help.
How did it make you think about yourself differently?
I think I felt a lot better and a lot more empowered that I was able to change like not only my community but like the lives of people around me. And something I didn't really touch on before is like growing up in the environment that I did, I think I spent a lot of my life feeling insecure and not feeling like I was ever good enough to like, go to the Stanfords, to go to the Berkeleys, whatever. And so I just, even entering college, like had this whole like, I can join the corporate world and that's it kind of mentality. And until like just the span of net impact in senior year, I don't think I really thought that I could ever make like a true difference. And I always thought of myself as a leader, but not like an important leader. I never thought that I could actually get things done. And of course, everyone has their friends who are like, oh, Nivi, you're doing an awesome job, you're wonderful. But I'm like, yeah, great, like cool, thanks. But I think this was the time when the insecurity really went away. And although it comes back every now and then, just being able to see that, I did it. And it's not just like people telling me I did it. It's like people were rallying behind this idea, and we'd been doing projects on campus that weren't being done before. And the work that we've been doing like still exists.
Insecurity is like one of the top things people struggle with. I've struggled with it a lot in my life and career for similar reasons, pressure from parents and whatnot. What do you think of your relationship to insecurity today?
It's very complicated. I think the tough thing is I've learned and have been learning, especially as a woman in the workplace, you have to be confident first, everything else second. Like you have to walk into a room, command attention, otherwise people aren't going to take it seriously. And I think it's hard to understand that insecurity is something that you're allowed to deal with, because for a long time, I think it's just like kind of for a lot of people, but also for me, something I would never talk about, because it's hard to talk about feeling insecure and feeling vulnerable and all of those emotions that if you talk about it, you don't want people to know that you're not confident and you don't have it together. And I didn't want people to know that, I didn't have a plan, or like I thought I couldn't do it, because I was like, if people think I'm insecure, they're not going to rally behind me. And so for a very long time, I was just not really in denial, but definitely like just trying to ignore it and push it away. But that's it's not something that can be ignored and pushed away.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Appreciate it. So can you give me an example in the workplace, how you were talking about how they say you have to lead with confidence as a woman? Is that something you've seen happen for you, and how have you sort of dealt with that in a live situation?
Can you be a little more specific?
Oh, you were just saying in the workplace, they've told you, someone, you didn't say who, told you be confident, right? Like confidence first. As a woman, you have to show that. And I'm curious what your experience has been. Has that actually been the case, that you've had to be confident first? And do you have an example of a result that, you had to show that in a time where you didn't do that and something bad happened in your mind?
Yeah, so I think most of that messaging was like pre-workplace. I don't know if there's ever been like explicitly my boss or manager being like, hey, be confident. But I think just growing up, it's been a message, and just like the women around me and my family, like people like my aunt, who's like a very successful businesswoman, she's always been very confident and very charismatic. So it's been a lot of like maybe not even tangible messaging so much as this is just what you got to do, and just learning from a young age. Like we have the same odds of success, things like that. And so I don't think there has been a time in the workplace that there have been times when I've felt not confident, but I don't think it's very hard for me to let my guard down because of like a lifetime of, hey, you're more likely to be less successful, so you need to do everything you can to overcome that. And so since I'm in consulting and all of my work is client facing, it's not so much that I've noticed it within myself, but I have definitely noticed that there is a huge difference even today with some of like the guys that I work with and some of the women that I work with. A lot of them, like for example, one of my projects was like a data role. A lot of them are like confident without knowing what they're saying, and a lot of women doubt themselves. And I'm like, dude, why are you doubting yourself? This is incredible. And I was on a proposal team once at work, and this guy was talking about like sentiment analysis and natural language processing. And I don't know too much about that, but I did major in statistics, and I did take some of those courses, and I had to cut him off and be like, that doesn't make that that's not going to fit what we're trying to do. And he was like a senior manager, right? And so he was like, oh no, you don't understand. And I was like, okay, but I do, and you're not correct about this. So yeah.
Well, I think today you're being very vulnerable and sharing a lot. So I appreciate that. And one really funny story, we'll probably cut this out, but one really funny story is I'm totally say like I'm guilty of this, what you're describing. I always say my wife can do the job and I can get the job because she's just so talented, and I like kind of baffle and fuddle through things. So I think you're so accurate what you're saying. What I did want to ask you about, let's see here. We have a couple extra minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like 11:15. In that case, I wanted to hear what you had to say a bit more about this topic. There's one question that comes to mind for me, which is, have you heard the term authentic leadership?
A little bit.
What do you think of authentic leadership in terms of this conversation of women need to be more confident than perhaps men and all of that? I'm just curious.
Yeah. It's hard because I think that, as a woman being taught all of these things, it's going to be incredibly difficult to be genuine and be authentic. And I think that's hard, and it takes a lot of work. And I think it takes a lot of credibility before you can get to that point. I think, Sheryl Sandberg was, I think either talking or in her book, she was like writing about how I think after her husband passed away, she had a lot of emotional moments at work, and she just didn't think that was okay. And like, I think you almost have to, and maybe this isn't true, but I feel like you almost have to build that sort of credibility, maybe not to that level, before you can expose more of yourself. And I think that's unfortunate, and I do think it's changing, and that especially like tech companies are leading the way to be more authentic, to be more genuine. And so I hope that follows. But I think at this point in time, I think the main thing is like to be taken seriously before all else, because I don't think you can really make that same impression if you're not.
It's really interesting. I think you're a wonderful young leader, and I think you don't. Well, I don't know what you have to do, but I do think it's something that could be changing with the generations.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so, because it's hard to have this idea your whole life where it's like, oh, like never show your emotions, because that's something that I've struggled with for a very long time and still struggle with. And I think we could all be a lot healthier and be more comfortable with sharing what we want to do if we didn't have that fear of rejection and the fear of being vulnerable. And I think we would have just like in terms of the workplace, I think we would just have a lot of better ideas and a lot more socially impactful ideas if we were allowed to share our actual interests and share our actual passions without being like, oh, I don't want to sound like dumb or that I don't care about work.
Yeah, and at Google, where I was last, there was some research showing that psychological safety is the number one thing for effective teams. So I think it's really interesting to think about that. And yeah, I just appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, so I actually was on a project there, and my like client manager was one of the most incredible managers that I've had, and he actually started like by introducing all of us and talking about psychological safety and leading with the values and the vision rather than, hey, over the next few weeks I need these dashboards built. And I think a lot of managers do that, and I don't think that they're, bad people or necessarily bad leaders, but it really, really set the tone for, listen, we're all a team. And, in consulting, there's often a divide between us consultants and, Google or whoever as the clients. And I realize that's going to probably always exist, and that's part of the nature of the work. But being able to work on, the Google project in an embedded team was hugely hugely important to my personal growth, but also to the quality of work that I was able to do, because I could, instead of just like sitting for like 2 hours and trying to Google all of this stuff and being like, how do I do this and what do I do? And I could go straight to him and be like, hey, listen, I know you asked for this earlier, but I need a little more guidance. And I think him having led with psychological safety and like being valued as a team member, that made things just a lot better, but a lot more efficient. And so I think it's just good on so many levels.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing all of that. Last question on this front is, do you see any difference in generations? Like, as someone who is of a younger generation than Sheryl Sandberg, for example, do you feel like in terms of how women have to be in the workplace, there's something different? I mean, obviously it's different from the 50s to Sheryl Sandberg, but is there a difference you're noticing even as this budding, young leader?
Well, I hope so. I don't know about noticing a difference in outcomes exactly, but I have been involved even like through Accenture, just creating like a lean in chapter, for example, and being involved in women's resource groups and just talking to a lot of like the people my age. And I think people just care a lot more, and they're able to be like a lot more genuine because the culture's been slowly changing. And so I don't know, what it was like, 10, 20 years ago, because I wasn't part of the workforce then, but talking to parents and other adults there, I'm really glad to be at a time where, all the issues aren't fixed and there's still a lot of work to be done. But even within my teams, when there's people my age and people older, like the senior manager I was telling you about that completely shut me down, I noticed not only with young women, but also with young men and like people my age I think there's still a lot of the same trends that, all of the mansplaining stuff. But I think it is being phased out. And I think that due to all of the open talk about it and the sharing surrounding our stories and surrounding the fact that, listen, we have a lot to share and we have a lot to contribute and we know a lot of stuff, I really do think that things are changing and will continue to change.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing. I don't pretend to know. I was just curious. So then a couple of just factual questions. When were you a senior in college? How long ago was that?
I graduated in 2017.
Okay.
So pretty recently.
That would be what? Last May you graduated?
Yeah.
Okay, so a year and a half or so is when you graduated. So 2.5 years ago is when this net impact thing started. Okay. I'm kind of curious. This is one thing I'm really just kind of curious about, which is senior year of college, you were doing net impact. Did you get recruited to Accenture at that time too?
Oh, so when I started Net Impact, like when I was founding the chapter, that was when recruitment was happening. So yeah, if your kind of question was like, why did you go from Net Impact to consulting?
No, that wasn't
Okay.
That wasn't it. I was just curious about the timeline, because I imagine that there was some, like, you were starting Net Impact at the same time you were applying for Accenture,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was the same time, and I didn't know from starting Net Impact what would become of it.
Right.
Part of it was just like, I want to start a club, and like part of it was I want to do something with the club. But I don't, like, up till that point, I didn't discover what fulfillment actually meant to me and stuff like that. So I still had my eye on the like consulting prize, and like I want to do something with my life that makes money. So that was like the huge timeline overlap, but that also led to like that was when all of the existential crises were happening.
So tell me a little bit about that. That's a little bit what I was wondering, is if you're applying to Accenture and that's kind of a dream of yours, and then you're starting to have this different experience, and I imagine Accenture accepts you sometime in the middle of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was that moment when Accenture accepted you? Is that, how did you feel, and where was the net impact stuff then?
So the thing which I don't really feel comfortable saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, is Accenture was honestly never a dream, which I the reason I feel bad saying this is because a lot of my peers have been like, you know, this is my dream company, really want to do it. Not to say that, you know, I'm not proud of what I did, but I think I wouldn't have called it a dream. I would call it a goal. And I always knew, you know, there's something more, but I was like, okay, this is going to be the best situation that I can have. I'm going to work at Accenture. But yeah, when I got the offer, I was already having the thoughts of like, this is not something that I can do for a long time. This is not something that I can sustain. And it was good and bad because I kind of took it with the feeling of I'm going to make the most out of this consulting stint because I'm going to meet a lot of great people and it's going to be good. I'm going to get the experience that I wanted to get. But I'm not going to get like sucked in by all of the awesome perks and the happy hours and the stuff that really keeps people, you know, in the job. So it was good and bad because on one hand I was like, what am I doing with my life? I discovered this awesome nonprofit-y thing, but on the other hand I was like, okay, I can get back to that once I kind of get settled, once I get financially stable. So yeah.
Well, my personal thoughts, and take them for whatever you want, is I don't think there's one path to making a huge impact. I think you can do it in the corporate world, you can do it in a nonprofit world, and there's different things you have to deal with depending on who you are, your financial situation, your career stage. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with working at Accenture. Personally, I actually went to Google completely.
Yeah.
I went from Khan Academy, a nonprofit, to Google because I was a little unhappy at Khan Academy, and then Google recruited me and I was kind of flattered, you know.
Yeah.
Not exactly the most authentic reasons, but there's a large value in actually one person who advocates for this, who I have mixed feelings about, but I don't know if you know William McCaskill. He started two organizations. One's called Effective Altruism, and one's called 80,000 Hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You've heard of those?
Yep.
And he makes an argument that you should maximize your earnings because that's how you can have the biggest impact on the world. So he actually advocates for people sometimes to go into high earning careers to have more impact than working in a nonprofit, to some of the points you said about it not being glamorous or whatever. That's
like also the struggle that I'm dealing with right now is like, as I continue my career, I've learned a lot from consulting. It's been a good time, but like, as I've been mentioning, you know, I'm trying to find something more, but I haven't decided like, oh, I want to go into nonprofit, because it's hard to find the sweet spot between having enough money and influence and just power to make a difference and like going into something that's like mission driven and value driven. And so I feel like smaller companies or like ed tech or something that is like a middle ground is a good stepping stone, because yeah, it's hard to fathom the thought of like holding a lot of influence and getting people to be behind you if you haven't built your network or if you don't have the resources. Like, even with the podcast, even with Get Schooled, it's one of the things that I've been using is like, so I was on a previous social media client, and we're able to like dog food their ad products. And so I've been able to like help not only get credits from myself but also members of my team, and like use those resources to promote what I am passionate about. So, and I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was just like, you know, didn't have a job, didn't have connections. So I think it's really hard to, still today, I'm trying to figure out where exactly is that sweet spot of, you know, money versus mission versus fulfillment versus, you know, greater good. So it's tough.
Well, good for you to explore that. I don't think there's a right answer personally. I think it changes for people at different times. So I hope you keep all the options open and listen and feel what's going on inside yourself. Personally, I find like the stuff we talked about with insecurity, the more you work on that and the better you feel about that, the clearer some of those other things become.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to hear a little bit about your podcast. We haven't talked about that. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing with this Get Schooled show.
So Get Schooled is a podcast about American education. It's the type of stuff that, education is one of those topics that everyone's like, oh yeah, the education system's flawed. But like me, for example, I didn't know why it was flawed exactly, other than the fact that I was meeting these people who could have been better trained, better educated. But this was like our exploration of some of the issues behind it. And also the main point was to get people to care about this issue as much as we did. So we've like released 2 episodes so far. The first one is called Horror Stories of First Year Teachers. And so that was mainly, I think it was like a great starting episode because it's fun. It's mostly conversation between me and Lana. She just finished. Well, now she's on her 2nd year of teaching. But, it's fun, but it's also a little emotional and a little bit like sharing those struggles. And teachers don't get paid more or like supported that much as they should be. And here they are raising their children. Bad things are happening to them. Good things are happening to them too. But we wanted to really share that. And then we also recently released like a really short episode about education spending.
Cool. And where can people find it?
Pretty much your major distribution channels: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher.
Nice. And of all the things you could have chosen, was there any specific reason you chose education?
Yeah, so that's been, like, as we've discussed, probably my greatest passion and the thing that's been nagging me the most. I do want to expand the scope of like the overall project that we're doing, but I think the thing that I've been reflecting about a lot with education is that it underlies everything. And if we had more educated people, not just in like STEM subjects, but also in like the humanities, just overall well-rounded education, I think that that's fundamental to a functioning democracy. There's actually an article that I read in 11th grade called Dehumanized. I don't know if you've ever read it.
No.
But the premise of the article is that education is fundamental to democracy. And up till that point, I'd never considered how important it was. So the idea that I've been thinking about a lot is just by having not just like a few high schools or a few whatever schools that are really good and function great and they have all the great teachers and the resources, but by having everyone hopefully one day, hopefully soon, rise to a similar level, by having everyone meeting, whether it's like state standards or like some set of standards, I think that's just fundamental to a functioning democracy, and that's just key to improving a lot of the other social flaws that we have.
So it sort of gets to the systemic change issue for you. If we have better education,
Yeah.
some other things like the culture we were talking about and women's issues in the workplace might also shift.
I think it's huge, right? Like if you introduce this at like a really young age, talking about like equality and why that's important and how that's important, kids absorb a lot of things. And but like my 5 summers working at summer camp, I've noticed that with a lot of kids. Like there's some kids that enter as little brats and you spend a few weeks with them and you explain simple concepts like why it's important to share. All of those things can be introduced at a very, very young age. And there's so much I think that can be fixed if it's tackled early on. And that to me is by building a better, more well-rounded and also a more accessible quality education system.
Yeah, I have worked in education, so can echo some of those things. What's unique about your podcast? There's plenty of education podcasts. What's unique about yours?
I think a lot of education podcasts, obviously not all, but a lot of them that we've researched and listened to are usually made for teachers by teachers. And although that's great, I think not as many podcasts like get everyone in general to care about like what the problem is and why it affects everyone. And I think a podcast that does it extremely well, which isn't focused on education, but did a 3-part series, is Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History. And that was, it's not an education podcast, but like those episodes were a reflection of what we were trying to do, which is be unique in the way that we were having an education podcast, but it's not just for people who are educators or in education. And I think that's really important because even today, I'm really passionate about this, but I'm not a teacher, and it's not as easy as I thought to get involved in changing this, because I think a lot of jobs are like targeting teachers or targeting people with administrator experience. And although that's great because they need to be represented and they are the important drivers because they know the problems, we're hoping to find ways to get people involved at like all levels of society.
Great. Well, I hope everyone listening to this checks out Get Schooled.
Thank you. I hope y'all check it out too.
And then last question I have for you is, what would you recommend others doing? Last question I would have for you is, what would you recommend others who are seeking more purpose in life, seeking more meaning? What would you recommend them do from your own experience finding it?
The main thing is just to get started. As you know, I'm still working in my current job. I haven't really changed much on paper, but by just taking this idea and putting it out there and finding something beyond work, that's a huge step to me discovering like what I am passionate about, what I am interested in. And so I think there's a lot of people out there, my own friends, who are looking for a greater sense of fulfillment and do kind of have some idea of what they want to do. But a lot of people just are a little more comfortable with coming back from their job and just hanging out. And although that's fine, I think the people who are looking for something greater, there's a lot of opportunities to get involved, whether that's making your own side project or volunteering or finding a cause that you care about, or just finding like a creative outlet for yourself until you figure out what it is you want to do. I think just like having something beyond your 9 to 5 or whatever your job is hugely important, because I think that's where like a lot of your real ideas get to blossom, is when you can create your own space in your mind or in your circle of friends or in your greater community to just be like, hey, I want to do this, but I don't have time at work, and just actually following through, because I think the follow through is the hardest part.
Totally. Doing stuff is tough.
Doing stuff is hard.
Yeah. Well, anything else you wanted to share or anything that's come up from this that you want to talk about more?
Honestly, that's mostly it. I'm pretty talked out.
Awesome. I also could hit the restroom. So, well, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nivi.
Thanks, Ethan.